The greatest misunderstandings in the galaxy did not begin with weapons. They began with a smile. Dawn spilled across the Atlantic in ribbons of gold as International Spaceport Liberty awakened beneath a cloudless September sky. Glass towers shimmered with reflections of orbiting stations high above the atmosphere, while magnetic transports whispered across polished lanes carrying travelers from every corner of Earth. The scent of roasted coffee drifted through the open concourse, blending with the crisp ocean breeze that slipped between the terminals. Screens welcomed visitors in dozens of human languages before smoothly transitioning into greetings from allied civilizations. To the people below, it was another ordinary morning. To Ambassador Seraphine, it was the most dangerous assignment of her life. Her diplomatic vessel descended through scattered clouds with flawless precision, silent except for the faint crystalline hum of its gravity lattice. The elegant silver craft settled onto the landing platform as if it had never disturbed the air at all. Inside, Seraphine stood perfectly still. Her ivory-white ceremonial uniform flowed around her like liquid silk woven from starlight. Fine metallic embroidery traced the ancient crest of her royal house across her collar, while a translucent mantle rested lightly over her shoulders. Her platinum hair framed a graceful face almost human in appearance, yet subtly different. Her luminous champagne eyes reflected shifting rings of light beneath their surface, and delicate strands of living crystal shimmered beneath the skin near her temples whenever her thoughts accelerated. She looked toward the sealed entrance as the onboard intelligence completed its final assessment. Environmental scan complete. Atmospheric conditions stable. Human emotional behavior remains statistically unpredictable. Seraphine answered without moving. That is why I am here. The hatch opened with a whisper. Warm sunlight reached her before the voices did. Thousands of people crossed the terminal below. Families embraced. Workers hurried toward early meetings. Children laughed while chasing small service drones decorated with colorful stickers. Nothing appeared militarized. Nothing appeared threatening. Yet within 3 seconds of stepping onto the platform, Seraphine stopped walking. A maintenance worker carrying a toolbox looked up from repairing a railing and smiled at her. A young woman pushing a stroller smiled as she passed beneath the arrival bridge. An elderly man wearing a baseball cap tipped it politely and smiled. 2 airport volunteers arranging welcome banners noticed the elegant visitor from another world and smiled as well before returning to their work. Seraphine remained silent. Her internal translator recorded every interaction. Her diplomatic visor projected discrete analytical text across her vision. Facial expression identified. Human smile. Frequency increasing. Unknown relationship to subject. Probability of coordinated psychological manipulation, 87%. She had studied humanity for nearly 2 years before arriving. Their governments, their economy, their military history, their technological progress, their astonishing ability to recover after disaster. Nowhere in thousands of intelligence reports had anyone adequately explained why humans smiled so freely. On her homeworld, such an expression carried meaning reserved only for family, bonded companions, or carefully negotiated diplomacy. Offering it to a stranger suggested hidden intent. Trust was earned over years, not offered in seconds. Yet these humans smiled without hesitation, without invitation, without expecting anything visible in return. Curious, she whispered. Another notification appeared. Emotional anomaly detected. Human observation pattern inconsistent with established galactic social protocols. Before she could continue her analysis, a calm voice rose from the bottom of the arrival ramp. Good morning, Ambassador Seraphine. Welcome to Earth. She looked down. A tall man stood waiting with a simple identification badge clipped to a navy blazer instead of ceremonial armor or expensive diplomatic attire. His posture was relaxed, his shoulders square, his expression unguarded. He carried no visible weapon, just a digital tablet and a paper cup releasing the unmistakable aroma of fresh coffee into the cool morning air. His name badge read Daniel Carter, International Civil Relations Coordinator. Then, without hesitation or calculation, he smiled at her exactly the same way everyone else already had. Daniel Carter did not lower his smile, nor did he seem concerned by the several silent seconds that followed. Around them, the enormous arrival terminal continued breathing with effortless rhythm. Travelers rolled their luggage across polished floors. Digital announcements echoed softly overhead. Somewhere nearby, A street musician played a gentle melody on an acoustic guitar while children stopped to listen before running after their parents again. Nothing in the scene suggested ceremony. Everything suggested ordinary life. That, more than anything else, unsettled Ambassador Seraphine. Her diplomatic visor quietly expanded its behavioral analysis. Subject, Daniel Carter. Heart rate stable. Eye movement consistent with sincerity. Vocal stress indicators absent. Probability of concealed hostility, less than 2%. Probability of unknown cultural protocol, unresolved. Daniel offered a respectful nod instead of reaching for a handshake. I hope your flight was comfortable. The welcoming committee is still preparing the conference hall, so we have a few minutes before the official schedule begins. Seraphine studied him carefully. You smiled before introducing yourself. Daniel blinked once, surprised only by the question. Yes. You do not know me. That is true. Yet you displayed a gesture reserved for trusted relationships. Daniel laughed softly, not at her, but at the difference between them. Not here. He glanced toward the busy terminal where another family reunited with joyful embraces. Around here, smiling usually just means we are glad someone is here. Her luminous eyes narrowed slightly. Even if that individual is entirely unknown, especially then, the answer lingered in the cool morning air. Her translator confirmed every word. The meaning, however, refused to fit into any established diplomatic framework. As they walked through the terminal, Daniel maintained an easy pace, allowing curious travelers to continue their routines without interruption. He greeted an airport custodian polishing the floor. Morning, Luis. The older man smiled warmly. Good morning, Daniel. Moments later, he thanked a security officer for helping an elderly traveler locate the correct gate. He complimented a florist arranging autumn bouquets beside the information desk. He held an elevator door open for 3 exhausted nurses returning from an overnight medical conference. Every interaction lasted only seconds, yet each ended the same way. A smile. A thank you. A wish for a good day. Seraphine activated a discreet recording drone no larger than a hummingbird. It floated silently several yards behind them, documenting every exchange for the diplomatic archives. After exactly 23 interactions, she finally spoke again. Do these individuals possess political influence over your government? Daniel looked puzzled. No financial leverage? No familial connection? No. Then why invest emotional energy into people you may never encounter again? Daniel considered the question with surprising seriousness. He stopped beside a panoramic window overlooking the runways where spacecraft from Earth and distant worlds rose together into the brilliant blue sky. Because for a few seconds, our paths crossed. Seraphine remained silent. Daniel continued quietly. Life is already complicated enough. If someone leaves an interaction feeling seen instead of ignored, maybe their day gets a little better. Maybe they pass that feeling to someone else. You never really know. Her analytical systems immediately searched for hidden strategic objectives. None appeared. No measurable economic gain. No diplomatic advantage. No exchange of favors. No contractual obligation. The algorithm produced an unusual result. Human behavior cannot be explained through transactional models. Additional observation required. As they resumed walking, a little girl carrying a stuffed rabbit accidentally dropped a small drawing onto the floor. Before Seraphine's enhanced reflexes could react, Daniel simply bent down, picked up the colorful paper, brushed away a speck of dust, and returned it with another gentle smile. I think this belongs to you. The child beamed as if he had returned something priceless. Thank you, mister. She hurried away, proudly showing the drawing to her mother. Daniel never asked for recognition. He merely continued walking toward the diplomatic wing as though nothing remarkable had happened. Seraphine watched the little girl disappear into the crowd, then looked back at the human beside her. For the first time since arriving on Earth, one impossible thought quietly entered her mind. Perhaps the mystery she had traveled across the galaxy to solve was not hidden inside human technology, military strength, or political history. Perhaps it was hidden inside moments so ordinary that humans no longer realized how extraordinary they truly were. The diplomatic reception did not begin until noon, leaving nearly 3 hours unclaimed on the official itinerary. Most visiting delegates would have returned to their secure accommodations or spent the time reviewing briefing documents. Ambassador Seraphine chose neither. She stood quietly beside the towering glass windows overlooking Liberty Plaza, watching humanity move with astonishing freedom. The plaza spread across nearly 4 city blocks, woven together by gardens, fountains, solar sculptures, and shaded walking paths where thousands of people crossed one another without hesitation. Her recording drone hovered almost invisibly above the trees while her diplomatic intelligence cataloged every observable interaction. A businessman carrying 2 briefcases paused to hold a door open for a delivery driver balancing several heavy boxes. Neither exchanged names. Both smiled before continuing in opposite directions. 2 teenagers accidentally reached for the same newspaper from a sidewalk kiosk. They laughed, stepped aside for one another, and wished each other a pleasant day. An elderly woman dropped several oranges from her shopping bag, and within seconds strangers from different backgrounds knelt together to gather every piece of fruit before she could even react. No negotiations occurred. No debts were recorded. No authority supervised these exchanges. Seraphine's analytical display refreshed repeatedly. Cooperative. Behavior frequency exceeding predicted baseline. No measurable personal gain detected. Existing cultural models insufficient. She found herself searching for exceptions instead of patterns. Surely someone would refuse kindness. Surely someone would ignore another person's need. Yet every 15 or 20 seconds another tiny act unfolded before her eyes. Daniel never interrupted her observations. He simply waited nearby, seated on a wooden bench beneath a maple tree whose leaves had begun turning brilliant shades of crimson and gold. He sipped coffee while reading messages on a thin tablet, occasionally greeting passing employees who responded with familiar warmth. His patience intrigued her almost as much as the smiles themselves. Finally, she crossed the plaza toward him. "You knew I would choose observation instead of preparation." Daniel looked up with an easy expression. "You came here to understand people. Meetings can wait." She tilted her head slightly. "You continue making accurate assumptions about an individual you barely know. Sometimes people tell you a lot without speaking." Before she could ask what he meant, a city bus stopped beside the plaza. Dozens of passengers stepped onto the sidewalk. Among them, a young father struggled to unfold a stroller while carrying a sleepy toddler against his shoulder. Without exchanging a single word, 3 strangers instinctively stepped forward. One steadied the stroller. Another gathered a dropped blanket before it touched the pavement. A third held the bus door until everyone finished. 30 seconds later, they dispersed into different directions as though nothing unusual had happened. Daniel smiled softly. "That happens every day." Seraphine continued watching long after the bus disappeared. Were they acquainted? Not at all. Will they ever meet again? Probably not. Then why cooperate with such efficiency? Daniel rested his coffee beside him. Maybe because someone once did the same thing for them. The answer settled over the quiet plaza like autumn sunlight filtering through the trees. It contained no mathematics, no strategic doctrine, no diplomatic framework. Yet it possessed an elegant simplicity that her civilization had somehow overlooked despite centuries of technological superiority. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. Bells from a bicycle echoed through the square. Somewhere a child laughed so freely that nearby adults smiled without even seeing the reason. Seraphine realized something unsettling. Human happiness seemed strangely contagious. One person's small kindness quietly altered the emotional atmosphere around complete strangers. Her visor detected subtle physiological changes within her own body. Elevated curiosity, reduced caution, emotional response outside mission parameters. She dismissed the notification almost immediately, unwilling to examine it too closely. Instead, she focused on Daniel, who had resumed watching the passing crowd with calm contentment rather than scientific interest. He was not studying humanity. He was simply living inside it. For the first time since leaving her homeworld, Ambassador Seraphine wondered whether the greatest achievement of Earth was not its ships, its cities, or its growing influence among the stars. Perhaps humanity's greatest invention was an invisible habit so ordinary that no machine could measure it, and no diplomatic archive had ever thought it important enough to record. By early afternoon, the formal reception had ended, replaced by a quieter schedule that allowed visiting delegates to experience daily life beyond conference halls and polished speeches. Instead of assigning a security convoy, Daniel suggested a walk through Harbor Market, a district only a few blocks from the spaceport where Earth and off-world cultures naturally blended together. Seraphine accepted without comment, though her diplomatic staff exchanged puzzled glances. On her world, ambassadors rarely traveled without carefully controlled surroundings. Here, Daniel seemed completely comfortable weaving through ordinary crowds beneath strings of autumn lights that stretched across pedestrian streets. The market overflowed with gentle sounds. Coffee grinders hummed behind small cafes. Fresh bread cooled on wooden racks outside neighborhood bakeries. Musicians filled the air with violin melodies while local artists painted colorful skylines beside fountains where children chased playful maintenance drones. Every storefront displayed handwritten signs welcoming visitors from Earth and beyond. Seraphine noticed something unexpected. Human businesses smiled as much as human faces did. Bright messages wished strangers a wonderful afternoon. Restaurant owners waved at people who never entered. Bookshop windows invited anyone inside simply to rest if they felt tired. The entire neighborhood appeared designed to reduce the distance between unfamiliar people. Daniel stopped beside a small family-owned cafe tucked between a flower shop and an antique bookstore. "This place makes the best apple pie in the city," he said. "Would you like to try a very human tradition?" Seraphine examined the modest building. "Your official diplomatic guide did not include this establishment. That is because this is not diplomacy." He smiled. "This is just Tuesday." She followed him inside. Warm amber light reflected from polished wooden tables, while the comforting aroma of cinnamon, butter, roasted coffee, and vanilla settled gently through the room. Conversations remained soft despite the crowded seating. Nobody hurried anyone to leave. An elderly couple shared one slice of pie while quietly reading together. Two college students debated astronomy over hot chocolate. A construction worker thanked the young cashier by name before collecting his lunch. Daniel greeted the owner with familiar warmth. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Harper." The silver-haired woman looked up from arranging pastries. "Daniel, it is wonderful to see you again." Then her eyes turned towards Seraphine. Without hesitation, she smiled exactly as everyone else had. "And welcome to you as well. We are honored you chose our little cafe." Seraphine instinctively searched for hidden motive. None appeared. Mrs. Harper simply placed 2 cups on the counter before Daniel could order. "The usual for you," she said. "And for our guest, I think chamomile tea would be perfect." Seraphine looked toward Daniel. "She did not ask my preference." Daniel chuckled softly. "She probably guessed you might enjoy something calming after a long journey." The older woman laughed gently. "If I guessed wrong, I will happily make something else." There was no offense in her voice. No expectation that her kindness be accepted, merely an offer. Seraphine stared at the steaming cup resting before her. Delicate wisps of fragrant vapor curled upward through beams of afternoon sunlight. She lifted it carefully and tasted the tea. Floral notes spread across her senses with surprising warmth. Mrs. Harper's face brightened. "Good choice after all." Seraphine lowered the cup slowly. "You wished to make a stranger comfortable before learning whether she deserved such effort." Mrs. Harper looked genuinely confused. "Honey, everyone deserves to feel welcome." The sentence arrived without ceremony, almost absent-mindedly, as she returned to serving another customer. Yet those 7 simple words echoed louder inside Seraphine's thoughts than any speech delivered during the morning summit. Her diplomatic intelligence immediately attempted classification. Philosophical statement. Religious principle. National doctrine. No verified source found. Daniel quietly stirred his coffee while watching sunlight dance across the cafe window. "You keep searching for the rule," he said softly. "Sometimes there is not one." Outside, people continued passing each other beneath golden leaves, exchanging smiles that appeared as natural as breathing. Inside, surrounded by ordinary conversations and the comforting fragrance of fresh bread, Ambassador Seraphine experienced something entirely unfamiliar. For the first time in her carefully disciplined life, she stopped analyzing kindness long enough to simply receive it. Iron-gray clouds drifted across the afternoon sky as Daniel and Seraphine stepped out of the cafe, carrying the lingering warmth of chamomile tea and fresh bread into the cooling autumn air. The streets of Harbor Market remained alive with quiet conversations and the gentle rhythm of ordinary life. Wind stirred golden leaves across the brick sidewalks, while distant ferry horns echoed from the waterfront beyond the city. A weather alert appeared briefly on several public displays, predicting a passing rain. Shower within minutes. Nobody seemed alarmed. Store owners simply rolled out awnings. Street musicians covered their instruments. Families opened umbrellas with practiced ease and continued their conversations as though the changing weather were simply another familiar guest. Seraphine watched every movement with the same careful attention she had devoted to diplomatic negotiations throughout her career. Nothing here appeared rehearsed, yet thousands of individuals adapted together without command or instruction. Her analytical systems quietly searched for central coordination and found none. The first drops of rain tapped softly against the pavement, leaving dark circles across the stone before expanding into a steady curtain of silver. Daniel unfolded a simple navy umbrella from his shoulder bag. "Looks like we timed lunch perfectly," he said with an easy smile. Seraphine activated the protective energy field woven into her ceremonial mantle, but paused before enabling it fully. Around them, unexpected scenes unfolded one after another. A young couple noticed an elderly man standing beneath a narrow storefront roof and immediately shifted closer together so he could share the shelter beneath their umbrella. Across the street, a florist invited passing pedestrians inside without asking them to purchase flowers. A bookstore owner waved several soaked tourists into the entrance simply to wait until the rain eased. Two delivery drivers covered a stranger's bicycle with a spare waterproof tarp before continuing on their separate routes. Daniel noticed Seraphine watching every detail. "Still collecting evidence?" he asked. "The evidence continues presenting itself," she replied quietly. They stopped beneath a broad maple tree overlooking a small public square where rain shimmered across the fountain like liquid glass. Several children laughed as they skipped through shallow puddles while nearby parents smiled despite getting wet themselves. Seraphine frowned slightly. "Their clothing is becoming saturated." "It will dry," Daniel answered. "The memories usually last longer." Before she could process the unusual response, movement near the edge of the square drew her attention. A little boy stood frozen beneath the rain, clutching a backpack nearly as large as himself. He looked no older than 7. His umbrella had turned inside out after a sudden gust of wind, leaving him staring helplessly at the twisted frame. Within moments, a woman walking her dog gently closed her own umbrella over the child instead. Another passerby quickly repaired the bent metal ribs with practiced hands. A third stranger pointed toward the nearby library where the boy's mother, already running toward him, appeared through the rain with visible relief. None of the adults remained long enough to receive thanks. Each quietly returned to the path they had already been walking. Seraphine followed them with astonishment. Their assistance required time. "A few minutes," Daniel agreed. "Resources? Almost none. Personal risk." Daniel looked toward the gentle rainfall covering the square. "Mostly just inconvenience." Seraphine lowered her gaze. "And still they acted." Daniel nodded. "Most people hope someone would do the same for someone they love." Those words settled deeply inside her thoughts. On her world, compassion was carefully organized through institutions, formal obligations, and calculated responsibilities. Here, compassion appeared spontaneous, woven invisibly into daily routines so completely that humans rarely paused to notice it. The rain gradually softened into a light mist as sunlight slipped through the clouds, painting a faint rainbow across the skyline beyond the harbor. People emerged from beneath awnings with renewed conversations and familiar smiles, continuing their day as though kindness required no recognition at all. Seraphine watched them disappear into the city until one unexpected realization quietly formed inside her disciplined mind. She had crossed countless star systems expecting to study humanity. Instead, with every passing hour, humanity was patiently teaching her. Evening settled gently over Liberty City, replacing the silver light of rain with a sky painted in deep shades of amber and indigo. Reflections from orbiting stations shimmered across the harbor like quiet constellations resting upon the water. The official diplomatic events had concluded for the day, and the delegation returned to the international residence overlooking the bay. Inside the elegant suite prepared for her visit, Ambassador Seraphine stood before a floor-to-ceiling window without moving. Below, ferries crossed the harbor with glowing navigation lights while pedestrians wandered the waterfront, their conversations drifting upward with the cool evening breeze. She should have been preparing tomorrow's briefing for the Galactic Council. Instead, she replayed hundreds of ordinary moments that refused to leave her thoughts. Her diplomatic intelligence projected the day's observations across a transparent display suspended in the air. Total human interactions observed, 382. Cooperative exchanges without measurable benefit, 147. Smiles exchanged between unrelated individuals, 421. Hostile encounters, 0. The numbers appeared precise. Their meaning remained impossible to calculate. Analysis requested, the artificial intelligence asked quietly. Seraphine answered after a long silence. Begin emotional behavior classification. Thousands of archived sociological models appeared before her. Ritual greeting, dominance display, commercial persuasion, courtship signal, familial bonding, diplomatic reassurance. None matched what she had witnessed throughout the day. She slowly dismissed every category. Create a new file, she instructed. Designation? The intelligence asked. Seraphine hesitated. Unclassified human social phenomenon. The system paused. Additional description required. She looked once more toward the harbor where strangers continued passing each other beneath warm streetlights. Some carried groceries. Others walked their dogs. A cyclist stopped simply to help another rider adjust a loose chain before continuing home. Nobody seemed to believe they were doing anything remarkable. Description, she whispered. Voluntary expressions of goodwill toward unrelated individuals without expectation of reward. The intelligence processed the definition for several seconds before responding. No equivalent behavior exists within. Current galactic cultural database. I know, Seraphine replied softly. A quiet knock interrupted the room. Daniel stood outside carrying a small paper bag from Harbor Market. I hope I am not interrupting, he said. Not at all. He stepped inside only after she invited him, placing the bag carefully on a nearby table. Mrs. Harper insisted I bring these before her bakery closed. She said nobody should finish their first day on Earth without fresh cinnamon rolls for breakfast tomorrow. Seraphine looked at the neatly folded package. She remembered me. Daniel smiled. That tends to happen when people enjoy meeting someone. She touched the warm paper gently, feeling the faint heat still trapped inside. She gains nothing from this. Probably not. Then why? Daniel thought for a moment before answering. Because kindness is easier to share than to store. The sentence settled into the quiet room alongside the distant sound of waves against the harbor wall. Seraphine found herself unable to argue because every observation she had made throughout the day supported his answer. After Daniel wished her a peaceful evening and quietly departed, she remained alone with the simple paper bag resting on the table. It was not expensive. It carried no diplomatic seal or royal insignia. Yet somehow it felt more personal than the ceremonial gifts exchanged between entire governments. She approached the mirror beside the window while the city lights shimmered behind her reflection. Slowly, almost self-consciously, she attempted the unfamiliar expression she had studied since morning. The first attempt appeared forced. The corners of her lips rose unevenly. Her luminous eyes remained distant. The diplomatic intelligence immediately responded. Facial synchronization inconsistent with authentic human smiling behavior. She exhaled softly and tried again. This time she thought about the little boy beneath the rain, the elderly woman in the cafe, the strangers gathering scattered oranges, Daniel returning a child's drawing without expecting gratitude, and Mrs. Harper quietly sending breakfast to someone she had only just met. Something changed. Her eyes softened. The faint, crystalline patterns beneath her temples glowed with a gentle golden light. Authenticity level improving, the intelligence reported. Seraphine looked at her own reflection in silence. For the first time in her life, she was not practicing diplomacy. She was practicing humanity. The following morning arrived wrapped in clear blue skies and cool autumn air that carried the scent of salt from the harbor into every street surrounding the International Assembly Center. Sunlight poured across the sweeping glass structure where delegates from dozens of civilizations gathered beneath banners representing worlds separated by thousands of light years. Inside the Grand Conference Chamber, conversations remained measured and formal. Translation fields shimmered softly above polished marble floors, while diplomatic aides adjusted holographic displays for another day of negotiations. Daniel stood near the entrance coordinating arrivals with the same quiet professionalism Seraphine had come to recognize. He greeted every delegate exactly as he greeted airport workers, cafe owners, security officers, and children. Nothing in his expression changed because of status. The highest-ranking ambassador received the same sincere smile as the technician calibrating translation equipment. Seraphine noticed the pattern immediately. Human behavior remained remarkably consistent regardless of hierarchy. Before the opening session could begin, an unexpected interruption spread through the chamber. One of the visiting delegations from a distant coalition paused abruptly after several Earth representatives smiled while welcoming them into the conference hall. Whispered conversations quickly rippled through the visitors' ranks. Their cultural advisors exchanged uneasy looks. Within moments, several delegates stepped aside, requesting clarification before formal discussions proceeded. Their chief representative spoke with careful restraint. Our delegation has detected repeated facial signals normally reserved for deceptive negotiation rituals within our civilization. We request confirmation that no psychological influence is being attempted. The spacious hall fell unusually quiet. Earth. Officials looked genuinely confused. They had offered nothing more than a friendly welcome. Yet what had seemed ordinary to one civilization had become deeply unsettling to another. Seraphine felt an unexpected realization settle over her. Just 2 days earlier, she would have shared the same concern. She understood exactly why the visitors felt uneasy because she had arrived carrying the identical assumption. Daniel remained calm. He did not interrupt or defend himself. Instead, he quietly waited, allowing space for misunderstanding rather than forcing an explanation. That patience itself reminded Seraphine of every lesson she had observed since landing on Earth. One of the conference moderators turned toward her. Ambassador Seraphine, your civilization initially expressed similar questions regarding human customs. Would you be willing to share your observations? Hundreds of eyes shifted toward her. For the first time during her mission, the carefully prepared briefing stored inside her tablet no longer seemed important. She slowly rose from her seat and stepped into the center of the chamber. Sunlight filtered through the enormous glass ceiling, illuminating the faint crystalline patterns beneath her skin with a soft golden glow. She looked first toward the concerned delegation, then toward the Earth representatives waiting in respectful silence. When I first arrived, she began, I believed every smile concealed an intention. The translators carried her words throughout the chamber in dozens of languages. In my society, trust is earned slowly. Expressions of warmth are reserved for those who have already proven loyalty. Therefore, when strangers smiled at me, I assumed they desired influence, advantage, or information. She paused, remembering the airport, the cafe, the rain, the little boy, and the warm paper bag resting on her hotel table. I investigated those smiles. A few delegates exchanged curious glances. I measured them, recorded them, compared them against centuries of diplomatic behavior. I searched for hidden strategy. She allowed a gentle breath before continuing. I found none. The silence grew even deeper. Instead, I discovered something far more difficult to understand. Humans often smile simply to acknowledge another person's existence. They offer kindness before certainty, respect before familiarity, welcome before judgment. She turned toward the visiting delegation with quiet sincerity. The gesture that alarms us is not a weapon. It is an invitation. It asks for nothing except permission to begin with goodwill. Around the chamber, expressions softened one by one. Several delegates slowly lowered the concerns they had carried into the room. Across the aisle, Daniel met her eyes for only a brief moment. He did not speak. He simply offered the same calm smile that had greeted her on her first morning on Earth. This time, instead of questioning it, Ambassador Seraphine felt herself instinctively smile back. The atmosphere inside the International Assembly Center changed almost imperceptibly after Ambassador Seraphine finished speaking. The tension that had quietly settled over the chamber dissolved like morning mist beneath sunlight. Delegates who only minutes earlier had viewed one another with uncertainty now resumed their seats with thoughtful expressions rather than guarded ones. Translation fields shimmered softly above the circular conference floor, while the panoramic glass ceiling revealed an endless blue sky stretching beyond Earth's atmosphere. No dramatic declaration had been signed. No historic treaty had been announced. Yet everyone present sensed that something meaningful had shifted. During the afternoon recess, representatives gathered in smaller circles throughout the spacious atrium overlooking the harbor. Conversations became less formal. Questions replaced assumptions. Curiosity slowly overcame caution. Seraphine moved quietly among the delegates, answering thoughtful inquiries about her observations without exaggeration or persuasion. She did not attempt to convince anyone that humanity was perfect. She simply described what she had witnessed with complete honesty. Their kindness is remarkably ordinary, she explained to a cultural historian from the Lyrian systems. That is precisely why it is difficult to recognize. Humans rarely consider these actions extraordinary because they have woven them into daily life. Nearby, Daniel continued coordinating schedules with his usual calm efficiency. He adjusted conference rooms, helped visiting technicians resolve translation settings, and carried stacks of printed materials between meeting halls without seeking attention. More than once, Seraphine noticed foreign delegates quietly observing him instead of the official speakers. They watched how he thanked custodial staff, how he patiently answered repeated questions from nervous visitors, and how he smiled with exactly the same sincerity every single time. Eventually, the chief representative from the coalition that had questioned Earth's customs approached Daniel personally. The elder diplomat paused for several seconds before speaking. "Coordinator Carter." Daniel looked up immediately. "How may I help you?" The elder hesitated, then made an unexpected request. "Would you teach me your greeting?" Daniel seemed genuinely surprised. "You mean smiling?" The delegate nodded slowly. "If it carries the meaning your ambassador has described, then I believe my people should learn it correctly rather than continue fearing it." Daniel's expression softened with quiet warmth. "There is not much to teach. There must be a technique." Daniel shook his head gently. "Not really." He placed the conference folder aside and stood facing the elder diplomat. "You simply look at someone and decide they matter, even if you have only just met." The surrounding conversations gradually faded as nearby delegates listened. Daniel continued in the same calm voice he had used throughout the entire visit. "If that thought is sincere, the smile usually takes care of itself." Silence followed. Not an uncomfortable silence, but one filled with reflection. The elder ambassador inhaled slowly, looked directly at Daniel, and allowed the corners of his mouth to rise with noticeable uncertainty. It was imperfect, slightly uneven, entirely genuine. Daniel answered with his familiar smile. "There you go." Soft laughter spread through the atrium, not mocking but warmly encouraging. One by one, delegates from different worlds began trying the unfamiliar expression themselves. Some looked awkward. Others laughed at their own attempts. Translation devices struggled to identify the emotional nuance while recording unusual physiological patterns. Seraphine watched the remarkable scene unfold beside the wide harbor windows, where afternoon sunlight reflected across calm water in shimmering bands of gold. Just 48 hours earlier, she had believed a smile represented concealed strategy. Now she was witnessing entire civilizations experimenting with trust through the simplest expression imaginable. Her diplomatic intelligence quietly displayed a new notification. Unclassified human social phenomenon. Cross-cultural adoption probability increasing. Recommended database revision. Seraphine dismissed the alert with a gentle gesture. She no longer needed an algorithm to explain what her own heart already understood. As the recess ended, delegates returned to the conference chamber carrying documents, tablets, and translation devices exactly as before. Yet something invisible accompanied them now. The distance between strangers had become just a little smaller. And somewhere in the center of that extraordinary change stood one ordinary human who still seemed completely unaware that the smallest habit of his everyday life had quietly begun changing the culture of an entire galaxy. On the final morning of the summit, the harbor awakened beneath a sky so clear that orbiting stations seemed close enough to touch. Gentle waves reflected ribbons of pale gold as ferries crossed the bay with quiet determination, carrying commuters whose ordinary routines had unknowingly become the most valuable lesson an interstellar ambassador had ever received. The departure platform overlooking the waterfront was far less crowded than it had been on the day of Seraphine's arrival. Official ceremonies had already concluded. Treaties had been signed. Joint research initiatives had been approved. Cultural exchange programs had been expanded beyond their original scope. Yet among all the documents archived during the summit, one unexpected addition attracted the greatest attention throughout the Galactic Council. It was not a military agreement or a trade proposal. It was a cultural recommendation personally submitted by Ambassador Seraphine. The document contained only one new diplomatic protocol. Its title read, The Human Greeting Initiative. The recommendation was simple. Every ambassador representing her civilization would begin future first contact meetings not with formal declarations, but with a genuine smile offered before negotiations ever began. Attached beneath the proposal appeared a single sentence written in her own hand. Trust does not always begin after understanding. Sometimes understanding begins after trust. The proposal passed unanimously, not because every civilization suddenly agreed with humanity, but because one respected ambassador had demonstrated that kindness itself could be observed, tested, and proven through experience rather than theory. Daniel learned about the decision only minutes before Seraphine's departure. One of the conference coordinators hurried across the terminal carrying the final diplomatic bulletin. "Congratulations," she said with a grin. Daniel looked confused. For what? Apparently you changed interstellar protocol. He laughed softly. I organized transportation schedules. You also smiled at the right person. Daniel shook his head with quiet disbelief before folding the bulletin and slipping it into his jacket pocket. He never considered himself responsible for any historic achievement. As far as he was concerned, he had simply treated another visitor the same way he hoped someone would treat his own family far from home. Across the platform, Seraphine approached the boarding ramp of her waiting vessel. Her elegant white uniform shimmered beneath the morning sunlight, while the faint crystalline patterns beneath her skin glowed with calm golden warmth instead of cautious silver. Members of her diplomatic staff stood ready beside the entrance. They had watched her transformation throughout the week, although none fully understood it until that moment. Before stepping aboard, Seraphine turned toward the people gathered below. Airport employees paused from their work. Mrs. Harper had arrived carrying a small box of fresh cinnamon rolls, wrapped in simple brown paper. The little boy whose umbrella had broken during the rain waved enthusiastically beside his mother. The maintenance worker from her first morning looked up from repairing another railing. Security officers, custodians, gardeners, technicians, musicians, travelers, and Daniel Carter all stood scattered naturally throughout the terminal exactly as they had on the day she arrived. Then it happened. Without instruction, without ceremony, almost every human there smiled at her. This time, no warning appeared across her diplomatic visor. No artificial intelligence suggested manipulation. No algorithm searched for hidden motives. She already knew what those smiles meant. Slowly, naturally, Seraphine smiled back. Not because protocol required it. Not because diplomacy demanded it. She smiled because every face before her reminded her that someone had chosen to make a stranger feel welcome before asking where she came from. Daniel lifted one hand in a quiet farewell. Safe travels, Ambassador. Thank you, Daniel Carter, she replied, her voice carrying easily across the platform. When I arrived, I believed your people smiled because they expected something from strangers. She paused, her luminous eyes reflecting both Earth and the stars waiting beyond it. Now I understand. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Understand what? Her smile grew warmer than it had ever been. You smile because you have already decided the stranger belongs. For a brief moment, the busy spaceport became wonderfully still. The boarding hatch closed with a gentle whisper. The silver vessel lifted silently into the brilliant morning sky, climbing above the harbor until it became a single point of light among countless others. Months later, on a distant world beneath unfamiliar constellations, another spacecraft landed before a gathering of nervous first contact observers. They stood uncertain, waiting for the alien delegation to begin formal proceedings. Instead, Ambassador Seraphine stepped forward first. She looked at complete strangers, remembered a quiet man at a spaceport on Earth, and smiled. One by one, every ambassador standing behind her smiled as well. The startled crowd smiled back. At that moment, without a single treaty being signed, humanity crossed another frontier. Not with ships, not with power, but with the simplest gift one civilization had ever offered another: